welcome to The Writer's Dream. This is a show where authors can talk about how they write their books, how they publish their books, and how they market their books. You can find us on YouTube. Just search my name, Linda Maria Frank. I'm the author of Annie Tillery Mysteries. And you will see about 125 interviews with various authors, many of them local. So if you're looking for some tips about writing or you're looking for some good books, please visit that YouTube channel and you can see those interviews. We also have a Facebook page. The Facebook page is also called The Writer's Dream. Imagine that. If you want to be on the show or you have a question for me, please use my email, which is my initials, lmf217@hotmail.com. Our guest today is Jack Bilello. And Jack Bilello has a very impressive resume. He graduated from CCNY. He is a Fulbright scholar. He is a Phi Beta Kappa. He was a history teacher and the history chair at Lindenhurst Schools. And he is a lecturer and an amateur political analyst.
Emphasis on amateur.
As we all are these days. And he is the author of American Patrol, I Still Love Joni James, Heart of a Lion, and today's book, Bonds of War. So welcome, Jack.
Thank you. It's great to be here again.
Good. Did I leave anything out?
Yes. I would have preferred you also include the fact that I'm a raconteur, a devil-may-care playboy, and a... No, well, that's to demonstrate that I do write fiction, because the rest is fiction here.
I don't know. I didn't mention that you're from Brooklyn.
Yes, I am. Born and raised in the Bountiful Borough.
Very good, very good. This is not really a snarky question, but your first book was in 1998, and this is after a career of teaching. What made you think you could write a book? I always want to know from the authors what it is that tips them over the edge from whatever they're doing, whatever their story is, whatever story they want to tell. What makes you want to write the book?
Well, I do disagree with you. I think it is a snarky question. But however, I will attempt to answer it. I always wrote. Even when I was in high school, I wrote on the school newspaper. When I was chairman of the history department at Lindenhurst, I did write reviews for a journal called The History Teacher. And I knew I had this story inside of me going back quite a few years to the 1980s, and I knew that someday it would have to come out. And finally it did, and I'm quite pleased that I was able to share this. I think it's a story worth telling and worth knowing. So that was why I did that.
So
yes.
you had a story you wanted to tell. I think that's a very good answer, because I think that's why most people write books.
And I do believe that once you tell a story, it'll never be forgotten. It becomes part of who we are as a people and as a nation. And I think that's a very important component of storytelling.
Yeah, I think also when you tell a story, you live on.
Yeah.
You live on through that story.
That's precisely true. Because in Bonds of War, the main character is, I give him the name Jesse Van Twelves, and I gave him that name because there was a World War II fighter ace. He was like our fourth or fifth fighter ace of World War II, whose name was Van Twelves, a very unusual name. Our leading fighter ace was Richard Bong, shot down 45 Japanese planes and was killed on a routine takeoff. On the day that we dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima, August 6th of 1945. Just taking off on a flight and after shooting down 45 Japanese planes. So, I mean, when you hear things like that, you say, these are stories that have to be told. So Van Twelves is a name that I came across and said, that is the name I want to use.
Yeah, this book is really a winning mixture between historical fiction and heartbreaking human interest. Tell us about the story.
Yes, well, to go back, goes back to when I was a child when my parents took me to see a movie called The Fighting Sullivans.
I remember
and it was a heart-wrenching movie. Perhaps the most dramatic scene that I could recall in any movie I've ever seen is when the commandant of the naval office in Waterloo, Iowa comes to tell the family, Mom and Pop Sullivan, and when he says, Mr. and Mrs. Sullivan, I'm afraid I have bad news for you. And they jump up startled and tense, and they said, which one was it? And Catherine Mary Roof, Al Sullivan was the only one married, she says, "Was it Al?" And he says 2 words, "All 5." And to think that you lose 5 sons, and it's the only time it ever happened in American history where 5 sons were killed in one battle, that stayed with me forever. So that was the basis and the heart and the impulse of my story. It's about the 5 Sullivan brothers, but much more. It's about the ship that they were on, the 700 sailors who were on that ship, and the fact that only 10 out of 700 survived the sinking of their ship, the USS Juno, and one of them became a friend of mine. Wyatt Butterfield was his name, and precisely as you say, Linda, when he died, I said to myself, I'm not going to let him die. I refuse to let him die. I'm going to tell that story.
I have a question for you. Taps is called Butterfield's Lament, or
Lullaby.
Lullaby, Butterfield's Lullaby. Is that the same Butterfield?
No. Butterfield was a Civil War general who wrote Butterfield's Lullaby in the Civil War in about 1863, and that became taps. That is taps, played at every single military funeral from the Civil War to this very day. And I can assure you that today, even in this great land of ours, that taps is being played at some military funeral because of the 16 million men who served in World War II and the millions who served in Korea. We're losing them every day. We're losing something like 30,000 a month when it comes to World War II veterans. We're only down to about 800,000 out of the 16 million. So taps is being played every single day in this great land of ours.
Wow, wow. So take us through the story in the book, because it's not just about the 5 Sullivans. It's really much more complicated than that. It's the bonds of war. What are the bonds?
Yeah, I tell the story, and I gave the character, his name is Jesse Van Twelves, and his son is Donnie, and Jesse is a veteran of World War II, one of the 10 to have survived the sinking of the Juno. So as you could imagine, he's suffering what we now call PTSD. World War II, we called it battle fatigue. In World War I, we called it shell shock. In the Civil War, we called it soldier's heart. It's all exactly the same, exactly those who have been devastated psychologically by the trauma and the experience of war. So Jesse is suffering from that because of being one of 10 to have survived the sinking of his ship, the USS Juno, and seeing 690 shipmates perish, including the 5 Sullivan brothers from Waterloo, Iowa. And I have his son Donnie, who's a Vietnam veteran. And because of what happened to Donnie in the Vietnam War, father and son, both suffering from the demons of their own wars, are cut off from each other. They can't connect. And the whole idea of the novel is to get these two together, get the father and the son together in a lasting and loving relationship between a father and a son. Takes a few hundred pages, but I hope it works.
Yeah, well, I'm not going to say if it works or not because I don't want to give it
I
away. You
will
have
let
to
the
read the
audience-
book.
yeah, I will
That's
let the
right. You
reader
have to read
determine
the
that.
book. So you really gave a lot of background for World War II because the ship is sunk in a run-up to the Battle of Guadalcanal, right?
It was during the naval battle for Guadalcanal. Okay. For the Triskaidekaphobiacs amongst us, the ship was sunk on Friday the 13th of November 1942. It had engaged in a hot battle zone with Japanese naval forces on the night of Thursday the 12th. 2 of our fighting admirals, Callaghan and Scott, were killed on the night of Thursday, November 12th. And the Juno was badly damaged, but she was limping away the very next morning, and a Japanese submarine, the I-26, under the command of Captain Yokota, spotted those crippled ships, fired a brace of torpedoes at the San Francisco, which was the flagship, missed it, and hit the Juno right in the main magazine, and she blew up and exploded and disappeared in 30 seconds.
Yes, with very few survivors.
140 made it into the water out of the 700, including George Sullivan, the oldest of the 5 brothers. And in the next 7 to 10 dreadful days, 130 of those were killed by shark attacks, drowned. Only 10 came out of the water alive.
So when you research a book, it takes you on a journey. You sometimes end up places where you don't expect to go. Did you have any surprise encounters?
Absolutely, absolutely. I would say about the early 80s, I saw Johnny Carson doing a TV show called Hollywood Goes to War. And there's that scene of all 5 that I described earlier. And I said, I want to show that to my students. They have never seen, have no idea that all wars are children's wars, that these kids were 18 and 19. One of those killed in the Juno was a kid from Lindenhurst, where I taught and was chairman for many, many years. His name was Lawrence Dumper. And I met his brother, Milton Dumper, and he told me that Lawrence was on the Juno, was lost. And he told me a story that to this day stays with me and touches me. He said he was going to sell his house in Lindenhurst, and he was cleaning out the attic, and he came across a Christmas package. And he read the card, and it said, "To our darling son Lawrence, Merry Christmas, 1942." And when Lawrence was killed on the Juno, the Navy shipped those packages back to the families. They received their dead son's Christmas gift. They put it in their attic and never opened it. And he gave me this unopened Christmas gift that they had sent to their son who was killed in the Juno. And when this book came out a number of years later, I took that package and brought it, because I had been invited to Waterloo, Iowa to do a program, that's where the 5 Sullivan brothers were born and raised, at the Grout Museum, and I brought that package with me to be put on display in that museum, which was in part dedicated to the memory of the 5 Sullivan brothers, and it's still there.
And that is an interesting little detour on your research.
Yeah.
Do you ever get writer's block?
Yes, and you have to fight through it. And the way to fight through it is determination and persistence. When I engage on a project, as you noted, I've written 4 books, and when I am on a writing project, I work every day, 7 days a week. And I'm not saying that I work 8 hours a day. Some days I'll work an hour, 2 hours. And when I have writer's block, I may work only a paragraph. And I may spend that hour searching for the perfect word, using my thesaurus. I think every author needs a good thesaurus to give him a variety and substance to his technique of writing. And I try to write every single day. And when I do that one paragraph, it leads me to another paragraph and to another paragraph. So I can write anywhere from 1 paragraph to 4 or 5 pages a day when I'm on the project. Yeah.
Yeah, I find just doing more research, just delving farther into the topic that I'm writing about, that helps me with writer's block. So we kind of touched on this, are your characters based on real people, or are the names based on real people? Because I read your book, actually read it several times, we'll get to that. But I do notice a few names in there of your friends.
Very good. I was at a meeting some years ago with a writers group, and Susan Isaacs was our guest speaker. She was lovely, and she's written a number of bestsellers made into movies. And she said that she started that she uses the name of real people. She gets permission, written permission, and I said, no, that's a good idea. So I decided to do that. And what I do is have the people that I know and include get their permission, have them sign a release with no hope of recompense, just permission to use their names. And I've done that in many cases. So all of my books, except for the last one, because that's a Civil War story. So, but all the other 3 books all have the names of people that I really love and know. And like, my friend Augie Ochino is in a couple of the books. Mel
He's
Rubenstein.
A hero.
Oh, he's a hero. Oh, he is very important because of his persistence and determination. Because what happened when and this is the true story, that when the ship blew up, the men who were surviving were on donut rafts, and they were subject to shark attacks because they're netting, and some of their times their legs are beneath the surface, and they are being killed by sharks without even realizing it as the sharks attack their legs. And so after 7 dreadful days in the ocean, Jesse Van Twelve's, Wyatt Butterfield, a real person, he was at his wit's end. A PBY, which is a patrol bomber, on routine patrol, spotted the men in the water. And the captain asked for permission to land in the ocean and was denied permission because it was a hot battle zone. They said, oh, we'll send the destroyer to pick them up. So he said, okay. So he kept circling. He said, we're going to drop some food and water. And when he dropped the life jacket of food and water into the ocean, it landed down current from the raft that Jesse was on, or Wyatt was on, and he knew that he would not last another day. So he went into the water and to retrieve it and was attacked by sharks. And he had a knife on him that he had from another buddy of his in the raft, and he slashed wildly and blindly, and apparently he nicked or hit a shark. And the other sharks, in a frenzy, attacked that shark. And he was able to get back to the raft, and when Captain Williamson, his real name was Williamson, saw that, he says, these guys are not going to last another day. Against orders, he landed in the ocean to retrieve and pick up these 7 survivors. And in the book, I have Augie convince the captain to do it, that he morally obliged to do that, to disobey an order, but to save the lives of these men because they're not going to be there tomorrow. And that's how I have that done. But I use other names of friends of mine and people that I know as well.
What was your favorite part to write?
Well, I think the favorite part that got to me was the climax when I bring these 2 guys together and how I bring them together. I have Jesse, after leaving Waterloo and having been through that experience as a flashback, knowing that his son has been devastated by the Vietnam War, and Jesse comes to a realization. And the Field of Dreams is right about 70 miles from Waterloo, and I went to visit it when I went to Waterloo. That's where the movie The Field of Dreams was made.
Baseball.
Yeah, the baseball movie. And if you remember, The Field of Dreams is when you get a second chance. The main character, played by Kevin Costner, sees his father when he was a young man, not when he was beaten by life, because he only knew his father beaten down by life, worn out by life, and he didn't have a good relationship with his father. But in the movie, he sees his father as a young man, full of life and hope for the future. And he sees that, and it's a tremendous climax. And I said, Jesse's going to say, I don't want my son to see me when I'm dead. That's what happens in the movie. His father is dead. He says, I want him to see me when I'm alive because he's my son and he needs me now, not when I'm dead. And he says, I've got to reconcile. I've got to get my son to the point where he can deal with his hopes and dreams and cope with his awful experiences of the Vietnam War. And that's the impetus. That's the impulse for Jesse to realize that he is more than a father to Donnie. He is a brother who has shared common experiences in war.
Like Band of Brothers.
Yeah, like Band of Brothers, exactly, yeah. So that to me was the fulfilling impetus of
the book is so touching in so many ways. Now, I have a practical question for you. Your book was written in 1998, and World War II and Vietnam stories engender a great deal of popularity. Your book was fading away like old soldiers do. What did you do? Well, the company went out of business. The publishing company, you had a small publishing company.
Yes.
They went out of business. You didn't have a digital manuscript because they didn't do that then.
No.
You don't have a written manuscript. So, but now you have a paperback on Amazon and you have an ebook.
An ebook.
Okay. So explain to me how you resurrect a dead book.
I'm going to...
It's not really dead, but you know.
No, I understand, but I will honestly, sincerely, and genuinely say 2 words. Linda Frank. Linda Frank.
This was...
I would have never done this in a zillion years. I would not have known how to do it. I would not have thought about doing it.
Neither did I.
But my communication with you, as we're both members of the Long Island Authors Group, and we have been communicating as a result of that common experience, and you're the one who said, hey, wait a minute. This book, I think, is worthy of a second printing and then actually worthy of bringing it out in Kindle or as an ebook.
Yeah.
And I said, well, thank you, and fine, great. I was honored and pleased and thrilled by the leadership that you took in doing this.
I had no idea how to do it, and basically what I was looking for was I was looking for somebody to print my books other than the people who published them. And I talked to another member of our organization, and she gave me the name of a printer. And then I asked them, this is for the people who are viewing the show so that they can see that this can be done. I called the printer and I said, I have a book that I want you to print. And they said, well, send us the manuscript. I said, you don't understand. I don't have a manuscript. I don't have a file. I have a book, the thing with the pages and the cover, you know, that you turn, and dog ear and whatnot. And they said, all right, send us the book. They took the book apart, and they have a program where they scan every page and they reproduce the book. So they did that for you, and they printed hard copies. And then I had to send it to a graphic designer who then set up a file that could be put on CreateSpace, which is part of Amazon. And then in order to put it on ebook, though, they don't want that type of file. That was a PDF file. And that had to be converted to a Word file, which I did with my computer lady, Trish Turgeson, and that was a lot of work because the program sees the words, but sees them as images, and they don't always come across as words, let me tell you. So we created the file, and it's very easy to use CreateSpace, very easy to use Kindle Direct Publishing once you can establish that file. So that's how you can take a book that you have. I mean, there are people who watch this show whose parents and grandparents have written books, and certainly back in those days there were no digital files. So that's how you do it. You really need a graphic designer.
Well, as you know, I am in computer preschool, and I recently really started to every day check emails. And the reason I do that, well, is because when part of our authors group that go to schools, we used to get invitations via snail mail. Now all of them are coming